Hello guys! Welcome back to Not Just Mecha. It's Marco here, and today we paint this huge box. I can't even put it all in the frame. Starting with the Rotmire Creed. Knowing that I'm a big fan of the game, Games Workshop sent me as a gift the new incarnation of Warcry. And in the spirit of my trademarked high-quality speed painting, I want to complete this whole thing as fast as I can. Because, as you can imagine, I really want to play. But, as always, delivering a ton of visual depth, atmosphere, and a strong painterly vibe. To put it in simpler terms, I want to catch this. With all its grittiness, sketchy energy, and, more subtle but for me essential, its yellowish, greenish, decaying mood and sense of the virtual environment. It sounds complicated and, yeah, a bit esoteric, but I'm going to do the whole job in basically 2 steps. Deconstructing and retro-engineering cool illustrations. You can really understand what makes them so interesting and appealing. And this gives you the ability to internalize and to translate that information in our different, but not so different medium. At the end, an extra dimension, it's not a big deal. And even if 2D, the artworks give you all the data you need. And this is great also from the purely mechanical point of view of efficiency, because heavily relying on reference material cuts a big chunk of planning and processing time. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe. And if you want to support my work, check my Patreon page up here, where I publish the real-time footage of my videos and extra cool stuff. Thanks a million, guys! But before diving into painting, I feel the need to make a little improvement to the sculpts. The main guys stand on poles to avoid the toxic fluids of the swamp. But the original stills are quite short, and I feel that they don't stand out enough from the crowd of the warband. I know, I'll regret this choice when I'll try to fit them inside buildings and low terrains, but in this case I really can't resist the rule of cool. I hide and blend the armature wire with the rest of the sculpt with a mix of modeling putty and plastic glue. I use just a tiny bit of glue as solvent to keep the compound thick and rough. And because of the density and the super quick drying time of this putty, I obtain with just a few brushstrokes a pretty convincing rendering of wood and old crusty bark. And I keep the bases crazily simple, part because I want to maintain the focus on the models, and part because at this point I can't afford to add a single millimeter of extra height. Always create your bases before painting. Your work will be easier, safer and quicker, and you get a better, more believable integration between models and bases, both physical and purely visual, because the paint job will naturally flow between the two as a single, coherent entity. Let's move to priming, and there's a lot to unpack here. Let's start clarifying some terminology. A primer is a product created and optimized to be the perfect connection between the material underneath and the subsequent layers of paint. But technically, you are not really obliged to use something labeled as primer as your first coat. And most of the modern acrylic formulations have all the grabbing power and elastic strength you need for the job. The access to a full range of tones opens a ton of cool possibilities, because even this very first preparatory layer can become a key chromatic part of your scheme. Plus, you save a lot of time stealing it from a boring step. Here, I use violet because I want to set from the beginning a warm, sick, livid sensation that will influence every overlapped new layer. I'm basically priming my canvas to set a mood more than a color scheme, like traditional painters do on the actual canvas, to start painting over the general environmental or emotional vibe of the scene. So, the first coat as it is doesn't really represent my shadows or my midtones, but it's more the unearthly, livid mood of the warband. And if you were wondering, that's also why I'm going with this kind of a neutral mid-value. Now I can set the real shadows, using a darker, deeper and slightly colder violet. That will be a nice complement to the warmer greenish tones I'll set in the higher midtones and lights. I'm going for a simple, wargame-friendly, zenithal light setting, so I established the deeper shadows by simply spraying from below, with the steepest possible lower angle. The next step is quite brutal. And if you are veterans of the channel, you know that it's something that I usually recommend avoiding. But this is an extremely calculated move. Let me elaborate. As you can see from the tube and the tone I have in the airbrush, here I'm jumping from one side of the color wheel to its saturated complementary opposite. Complementary tones neutralize each other into desaturated grayish-brownish mixes. And if you want to preserve their vibrancy, you have to add steps and bridges to avoid crossing this tricky central path. But in this case, that's precisely what I want, to bring this basic, saturated, semi-opaque green straight from the pot, closer to the sick tones of the illustrations. Basically, I'm using an optical mix happening directly on the figures to create a complex modulation in a single step, and cut again a ton of working time. I keep working with a steeper zenithal angle, switching to a simple skin tone, again straight from the pot. This semi-transparent application moves the minty, slightly cold green tone I have in place to warmer yellow-orange territories. And because it's naturally quite light, it sets the high values of my lighter midtones, and the position and pattern of the soft extreme lights that later I'll enhance and refine with the higher precision of the brush. I close this stage using a bit of pure white on the naked skins. The general values are already set, and you can see that the light brought by pure titanium white is not so different from the one set by the skin tone over everything. And that's because here I'm using white only for chromatic reasons, basically to set an extremely pale and unhealthy base for the skins, that still contain in the secondary angles all the previous rich information. Thanks to the careful study and deconstruction of my references, and a good planning and setup, I can move directly to oil paints that I use to set the basic tones of the single internal elements, using them as contrast paints, definition, and the full spectrum of transitions, going from the deepest shadows to mid/high midtones, all at once, in a single, crazily simple step. I first apply pure magenta on all the exposed bits of skin, so it has some extra time to really soak into the acrylic layer while I work on the other colors. For this same reason, I didn't apply any varnish between the two stages, because I want oils to physically interact and tint the pale, neutral acrylics underneath. Then brown on the equipment. And green, with a few random touches of brown here and there on the fabric. Note that these applications are just dead simple heavy washes, painted with just a minimum amount of control and precision. Other than being really quick, this process is also extremely relaxing, because the stakes of the single steps are really low, making it a perfect low mental effort option for intensive painting sessions that otherwise can easily become an endless chore. As soon as the white spirit in the mix has evaporated, 5-10 minutes with the heat of these days, I use dry makeup sponges to remove the excess of paint, and at the same time to gently blend the three basic tones of my skin in a soft, natural, smooth continuity. This isn't probably the optimal timing, but I really feel the need to visually separate the models from the bases, to better understand how the plan is working. Tamiya clear paints are always great to render in a single pass wet and glossy sensations. And thanks to this visual check, I understand that I want to see more explicit yellow elements, to make the skin my own, and to bring it to more iconic, sick, Nargol territories. This is totally something I could have planned from the beginning, adding it to my original flowchart and oil palette. But, you know, this kind of diversions from the source material can happen at any time, and you should be ready and open to adapt. Luckily, working oil on oil, it's really easy to move back and forth in the process, without the need of re-establishing the base work or previous steps. And this is what I've got after a couple hours of work. I know, it's crazy how good they look, even with this little amount of work. So here is the good or bad news, depending on your taste and point of view. If you're looking for a clean, smooth, kind of heavy metal style, the work is almost done. You can add a few edge highlights to make shapes and details a bit sharper, and the trick is done. Or you can just play with these guys. With great visual satisfaction as they are. But my goal here is to match the brushy energy of the artworks, so to complete the job, I move to the wet palette. I have the mandatory black and white, a couple of bright, light tones for the green elements, dark and light earth tones to add movement and variety to the natural equipment, and 2 warm tones to work on the skins and their flowing, unpredictable tones. When you stretch, spread, and clean oil washes to this extension and with this intensity, the general surface is almost instantly workable, because that micro quantity of real paint remaining on the minis is all in the deepest recesses that are done and you don't need to touch. Here because of the little misstep on the yellow elements, and honestly because it was starting to be late night, I gave the models the rest of the night of rest before moving to acrylics. And again, of course, no varnish. That would just flatten and kill all this layered visual complexity. I really love to work on these extremely organic themes and subjects, because the shapes don't have precise, strong, let's call them holding lines, and I can go fully painterly and abstract. I use different loose brushstrokes to paint at the same time the general idea of rough textures and materials, and a sense of movement that can add life even to the most static figures. And of course, a ton of energy to the more kinetic poses. But again, the actual brushstrokes don't have anything to do with reality or realism. They're just abstract, interesting shapes, loosely following the sculpt. The actual work also becomes more artistic, and less of an assembly line of mathematically optimized steps. I work the single models one by one, this time giving priority to their internal flow. Working on single, separate elements, you can easily lose sight of the big general picture, and they can look a bit disjointed. That's also why I don't like sub-assemblies. With my kind of preparatory work, this risk goes down to minimal levels, because the general mood is usually the foundation of every new layer. But still, I feel the need to make skins, clothes and wooden equipment a bit more a single thing, instead of just 3 separate blocks. And here is the final result. Without considering the modifications and the unplanned night of drying time, I close the actual painting process on my classic tight 4 hours. Oils are for sure our main protagonist here. Using oils on Nargol-related models, the mind goes instantly to weathering effects and gritty, grimdark finishes. But in this case, I really wanted to show you their power in setting basic tones, almost like contrast paints and similar products, and easily create shades and smoothness, ironically leaving the sharper roughness to acrylics, and to their natural tendency to remain where you apply them, and in the exact shape of the brushstrokes, for a great textural effect. And in the next video, I'll keep pushing on the power and versatility of these ideas, but working on the sharper geometric shapes of models almost completely covered in armor. So stay tuned! If you like this video, give it a like and subscribe. Remember that you can ask me anything down below with a comment, and you can follow my projects during the week using one of my socials. And if you want to support my work, check my Patreon page and join the community, or maybe ask for a commission. See you next week, guys!